In Richard's film Phantoms, the second DVD that he did, the whole issue of the abduction stories is covered in meticulous detail. It's actually, almost get you thinking, oh God, come on. And it gets to that level because there's so much detail in it. But basically, over time, the stories of approximately 4 different potential abductors were promoted in the British press and media. And if you watch the whole thing, the Phantoms film, it becomes clear that the prolonged and strenuous efforts were made to make the story fly, that there was a real abductor. It really seems to be just that, and it worked. Most people believe, if you not people that are here today, have not been exposed to this idea that Madeleine was not abducted. They haven't seen the evidence that she wasn't abducted, that this was a made-up story. So the first one really that Richard talks about is the Jane Tanner sighting, which I mentioned briefly earlier on. So Jane Tanner reported an abductor to the police on the day after the alleged abduction of Madeleine. She couldn't describe the face, as she'd only described him briefly. She'd only seen him briefly for a few seconds with the side on in poor light, but she gave quite a detailed description to the police nevertheless. She included that she could only see the child's legs and feet and that the child had pyjamas on. Closer examination of Jane Tanner's story reveals that it's not very credible. She apparently only told Jerry McCann about her sighting, and she didn't tell Kate, as she did not want to upset Kate. She also did not inform the others as a way of narrowing down a search that took place on the evening of the alleged disappearance. So she didn't say, that was where I saw the abductor, let's go and look in that direction. She didn't even say that. There is no real corroboration of her story either, certainly not when she told it. So who releases a picture to help identify a person when we can all see that it is a male with dark average length hair? There are no facial features, and this picture was put into the British press. You may have seen it before, you may remember it from the time. Portuguese police were immediately sceptical of Tanner's story because there wasn't sufficient substance to it. And they didn't really wish to tell anyone about it because it was so weak. They didn't want people to investigate something which they didn't really have strong evidence to follow up with. And Superintendent Bob Small of Leicester Police, as I mentioned earlier, he flew to Portugal with at least 2 other officers. Soon after this, they were involved in setting up an identity parade, including the helper, Robert Murat. Jane Tanner, who had reported seeing the possible abductor, was asked to identify from the parade who she thought was involved. She identified Murat, I said this earlier. Before identifying Murat, Tanner had meetings with Bob Small of Leicestershire Police and 2 people from a company called Control Risks. It seems that they suggested the framing of Murat. So they told her to identify him as the abductor, perhaps. Can't prove that. That's what, is highly suggested from this. 3 other members of the Tapas 7 also then remembered, all of a sudden, seeing this Robert Murat character. And as we shall see, then, they again changed their stories later. Was Jane Tanner used to set up morale for Amaral? So was Jane Tanner used to set up Murat for Amaral? Murat does not match an earlier description. So in other words, Jane Tanner even changed the description of the abductor. Initially it didn't match Murat, and later it did. So that was then the story, that Murat took her. Murat was then made a suspect, and so the British press obliged. And that was one of the headlines that came out. News reports also pointed the finger at Murat as a suspect. Later, the British press reported that witnesses reneged on their statements about Murat. When Jerry McCann was asked on camera if he knew Murat, he replied, no comment, and he walked off. I think this is in Richard's film. In fact, I'm sure it's in Richard's film. However, I might even have the clip later. However, Murat was later paid £600,000 in damages as a result of this story, because it was later found that it couldn't have been him. He was ruled out as a suspect. Now, the next alleged abductor, was this Smith man. Martin Smith was on holiday in Praia de Luz when he allegedly saw a possible abductor about 10 p.m. on the day of the reported abduction. He did not report this sighting until May the 16th, so that's nearly 2 weeks after Madeleine had disappeared. Reports in the British press noted that Smith was friends with Robert Murat, and Smith took legal action in relation to this statement. So Smith also contacted Richard D. Hall, following the release of the first 4 parts of the investigation, that's the buried by the mainstream media, and he wanted RDH to understand that Martin Smith recognised Murat but had never been introduced to him, nor were they friends. He declined to be interviewed by Richard Hall for this matter, though. Smith stated to the police that though he couldn't recognise the person in the photo, he could see well enough to know that it wasn't Robert Murat, the man Jane Tanner had identified as the abductor. Smith did not give out his story until 13 days after the reported abduction. Why was this? Why did he wait all that time? It'd been blanket covered in the press. Why did he wait nearly 2 weeks to tell his story? Now, Smith Man, he became a central part of a documentary about the McCann case, which aired on Channel 4 in 2009, and was also mentioned in Kate McCann's book. Martin Smith changed his description of the man he saw, and he remembered details. On May the 26th, Martin Smith said that he did not notice the body clothing and cannot describe the colour or fashion of the same. So he couldn't describe the clothing colour or the fashion. But by January 2008, Martin Smith said that the man was wearing beige trousers and a darkish top and maybe a jacket or a blazer. So he'd somehow remembered these details. He later suggested that the person he saw might have even been Jerry McCann. And Richard Hall recounts the story behind how Smith was involved in creating e-fits, which again didn't surface until months after the alleged abduction. And these are the e-fits that were created in association with Smith. Again, we don't really know. They were just sort of came out in the press, and there wasn't a great deal of information as to how those e-fits were made or exactly how they were generated. So looking at the 2 alleged abductors' stories again, curiously, it was the day after Murat had been named as a suspect that Smith contacted the police to say he saw a possible abductor at about the same time, but it wasn't Murat. Isn't that a strange coincidence that Murat was named as a suspect, then the day after this Martin Smith says it wasn't Murat? Okay, it is odd that the descriptions about the abductor given by Tanner and Smith match in many respects, though the time given differs by about 45 minutes. So in both accounts, the face was not seen. It was an unaccompanied male carrying the child. There was no buggy or pushchair. The child was a girl. The child was barefoot. The child was wearing light coloured or pink pyjamas. The child was about 4 years old. Held on the man's left side. No blanket, did not look like a tourist, dark jacket, light coloured trousers, 1.75 to 1.8 metres tall the man was, aged about 30 to 40, average build, within 600 yards of each other. So these descriptions sort of matched-ish. Then there was another abductor story came out, which he was given the name Sagres Man. This story came through a man called Nuno Lorenko. He alleged that Wojciech Krakowski, a Polish man from Warsaw, who had holidayed with his wife at the Solimar apartments in Burgau. It appears that there was a fabricated story about an alleged abductor being in Sagres, about 15 miles from Praia de Luz, which was printed in the Daily Mail. So basically, this alleged abductor was seen at another resort by Nuno Lorenko, photographing children. It was stemmed from an allegation of a man on the beach there allegedly taking photos of children, as I was saying. The story seemed significant to some because the McCanns allegedly visited Sagres on Monday the 30th of April. So in other words, there was a man there taking pictures of children. Did he follow the McCanns back to Praia de Luz? Did he identify that they had Madeleine with them and therefore decide, this is a child that I might be able to abduct? The Ocean Club creche records show the children were in the creche on the 30th of April. So why would he have seen Madeleine, the Sagres man, Wojciech Krakowski? He wouldn't have even seen Madeleine in this Sagres town. Gonçalo Amaral writes about this alleged sighting, etc., in his book, but it seems that when the evidence is studied, it was all a fabrication. It was another made-up story, made around someone who was identified as visiting Sagres, but not having done anything related to an abduction. It was just like some random guy that was identified. He was a real guy, but he wasn't doing anything remotely connected to the abduction of Madeleine McCann. Now, this phantom abductor was called Crashman, and he was allegedly found by DCI Andy Redwood and announced in a BBC Crime Watch programme in October 2013, which included a reconstruction of the alleged abduction of Madeleine. Redwood stated that this man had come forward, he wasn't even named, this man was not named, and stated that he was the man that Jane Tanner had seen. How would he know that Jane Tanner had seen him after all these years? Hence, Tannerman could be ruled out as a suspect after all these years, because this anonymous, unidentified man had come forward and said that he had been seen by Jane Tanner. And the photo of this guy, who wasn't named, was blurry. Where had this witness been for 6 years? Why didn't he come forward sooner with all the press coverage and everything? So you're left with more and more questions. So the summary of the Phantoms film is, again, as I said, really, they created a whole web lasting over a period of several years of these alleged abductors. If there was an abduction story, they had to make it look credible by having stories of abductors that had done the abduction. That's what it appeared to be. So we're now going to proceed with a theory, as Richard says, and as I say, that Madeleine died. If she did die, when did she die? Is this the last photo of Madeleine? According to Jerry McCann, it is. And the last photo of Madeleine was taken at 2:30 p.m. on the 3rd of May, according to Jerry McCann. Yet another oddity was that this photo was not immediately given to the police to help look for Madeleine. It was given to the police on the 24th of May, 3 weeks after the alleged abduction. So your child has been abducted. The police are going to say, what does she look like? You're going to pull out your digital camera. Here she is. This is a picture I took this afternoon. You're going to say that on the night of the abduction, or maybe the next morning once you've got your wits together and remembered where your camera is. Would you say that's reasonable? Not given to the police until 3 weeks later. So in his film, When Madeleine Died, Richard studies many details about the last photograph. Again, he probably does about an hour on this. The other photos and other photos that were presented to the police later, so they were eventually given other photos. The most obvious problem with the last photo of Madeleine is with the weather. In the photo, we see full sunshine, sun hats, tans, t-shirts and shorts, etc. So I'll just go back to that just to give you a quick reminder of that. Lovely day, no problem. So let's have a look at the weather for that week in 2007. This shows that the warmest, sunniest weather of the week was on Sunday, the 29th of April, and the rest of the week was cooler and considerably cloudy, or considerably cloudier, I should say. Now, again, because many people have investigated this in much more depth than I have, and there's a Madeleine McCann forum and so forth, a Jolhaven forum, or Jolhaven, not quite sure how to pronounce it, and these pictures have been dug up by people from websites, Flickr and stuff, which is one of these photo sharing websites, wherever. And these are pictures that were taken in the area of Praia de Luz, and I think we've got one in Lagos on the next slide, which is not that far away. Saturday the 28th is clear blue sky, bit of cloud. Sunday the 29th, you can see, is clear blue sky, no cloud. Monday the 30th, cloudier. Tuesday the 1st, even more cloudy. Wednesday the 2nd, very grey and sort of overcast. Thursday the 3rd, pretty cloudy. I'd say there's some pretty clear weather differences there. I'd say it's unequivocally different. Now, the McCann's cameras weren't given to the police early in the investigation. No photos were given by Tapas 7 members either of the McCann's friends. 2 people helped Jerry McCann prepare photos to give to the police. Michael Wright and Alex Woolfall. Why do you need 2 people to help you copy photographs from a digital camera to give to police? Why? They both travelled to Praia de Luz soon after Madeleine was alleged to have been abducted. Why not give the memory cards to police directly? Here's the cards. You're the police. We trust you. Off you go. Jerry McCann eventually supplied photos to the Portuguese police, but they were in PDF files. and in black and white format with no information to identify what camera they were taken with, etc., or the date and time. Here's an example image on the left. The colour image was not originally supplied to the police. That was given later, I think, following further questions and investigations. It was taken on the Saturday soon after the McCanns had arrived. So they arrived on the Saturday, and the other picture was probably taken on the Sunday, as we'll see. Richard's film discusses whether the alleged photos taken, whether other alleged photos have been taken, but these have not been seen by the public or may not even exist. There's another segment in the film where this other guy that was holidaying at the time, I forget his name, he was alleged to have taken a picture where Madeleine was in the background or something, and that story got out in the press. But when somebody contacted him, he said, I haven't got the picture, you can't see it, and we've never seen that picture. So in other words, there were stories in the press of other pictures of Madeleine being taken, but they've never been published. Okay, so now we come to a little bit about digital images, which I knew about a long time ago. When your digital camera takes a picture, and your phone takes a picture now, if you have your clock set correctly, which is normally the case with a mobile phone because the mobile phone's time gets set by the network, by the cellular network, that timestamp gets put in to the image in like a little field which you don't normally see. All right? And same with the digital camera. Any modern digital camera that's newer than about 15 years old will typically put the date and time that has set in the camera into the image file, embedded. You can't see it. I don't mean the little timestamp, that you sometimes see in the bottom corner. It wasn't in this image. It's embedded in the image file, in the JPEG file, for those that know. It's called EXIF. I forget what that stands for. It doesn't really matter for the purpose of this. The EXIF information contains a timestamp from the camera which gets embedded into the image, or into the image file, I should say, really. With special but freely available software, this date can be altered. I have a program called GeoSetter, which I use. I don't use it for altering dates, I use it for geotagging images. If the photo was indeed taken on the 29th of April and not the 3rd of May, this date would need to be altered. The police would know about this. Philomena McCann flew to Portugal, that's Jerry McCann's sister-in-law, I think, or Jerry McCann's sister, 2 days before the last photo was released to the public on 24th of May. Jerry McCann's brother-in-law, Tony Rickwood, has some experience with Photoshop, as indicated on the DeviantArt website. So, of course, where I'm going with this, and where Richard went with this, is that Jerry McCann has a relative that is an expert in image handling. Okay, so what I'm basically saying from that is that that last image of Madeleine wasn't necessarily altered in the appearance of it, but the data associated with the image, as in the date stamp, was almost certainly altered. So, Madeleine is said to have been alive on the 3rd of May. So can we establish that she was alive on the 3rd of May? Let's just say the photograph, we can rule that out because there are questions about that. So what other evidence is there that Madeleine was alive on the 3rd of May when she was allegedly abducted? We've got the evidence of the McCanns. We've got the evidence of their 7 friends. We've got the evidence of people unknown to the McCanns, and the evidence of Mrs. Pamela Fenner. Creche records because the children were put into a creche, so in other words, McCanns would go and do things in the complex, go and run along the beach or go and swimming, and they put the children in the creche. Seems a bit cruel to me when you're all on holiday together, but hey-ho, that's what they did. And so you can look in the creche to see when the children were signed in and signed out. And again, Richard covers this in great detail in the films. We're going to look at the last two items now, because we've looked at the dodgy evidence of the 7 already. So Mrs. Pamela Fenn here, in a statement to Portuguese police, she also refers to the day of 1st of May when she was at home alone, approximately 22:30, she heard a child cry. And that due to the tone of the crying, it seemed to be a young child and not a baby of 2 years of age or younger. Apart from the crying that continued for approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes, which got louder and more expressive, the child shouted, "Daddy, Daddy." This statement was made 3 months after the alleged abduction in August 2007. However, Pamela Fenn stated on camera that she knew nothing and no journalist had actually spoken to her, so what she actually was reported as saying by the press was apparently different to what she'd told the police. Now we'll talk about the nannies and the creche records. And I mentioned the lady called Charlotte Pennington. So RDH's films, they spend considerable time going through the creche records and the situation with the nannies. Again, there's probably an hour on this alone. There were two people involved with that, with the creche, basically, and Madeleine, and they were Catriona Baker, or Cat Baker for short, and Charlotte Pennington. Most of their statements centre around an alleged high tea which took place at around 5:30 p.m. on the 3rd of May. Madeleine and other children were supposedly present at this meal, which was, they were taken there by the nannies and they were given sandwiches, and buns or whatever. But if you read Kate McCann's book and other witness statements, including Jerry McCann's, there are quite a few contradictions as to what happened at this high tea, exactly when it took place, and who was there, which children were there, what was served as food. A lot of contradictions and that sort of thing. So this cast doubt that this actually happened, this high tea. Creche records show inconsistencies and don't tie up very well with what Kate McCann writes in her book about the supposed last day of Madeleine's life. Again, Richard covers all this in considerable detail in his films. Catriona Baker, when questioned by police, could not remember the details of who dropped and collected Madeleine at various times of the day. Charlotte Pennington claimed that she had spoken to Madeleine as part of her work at the creche. She did this once on 29th of April and once on the 3rd of May. Details were not clear. In a 25th of September 2007 Daily Mail article, Pennington was reported as saying she heard Kate McCann scream, "They've taken Madeleine," but no such statement was made by her to Portuguese police. So in the Mail she claims to have been a witness to the time of the abduction, but to the police she said nothing. This story came at a time when there was talk about the McCanns not being seen for 6 hours before Madeleine's alleged time of disappearance. Pennington's story in the Daily Mail doesn't match with what is stated in Kate McCann's book, and she said that the high tea ended at 6 p.m, not 5:30. And Annie's stories don't properly match each other or the McCanns. And Cat Baker actually was known to the McCanns. She visited them in November 2007. So Richard Hall concludes that we cannot rely on this as being an accurate enough version of events which would prove that Madeleine was alive on 3rd of May at 5:30. There is not enough evidence to say that story was true. As I say, all the statements about it conflict. Okay. So, I'm now going to play a segment from Richard's film where he discusses a credible sighting of Madeleine.
And in any event, we have the photos of Madeleine playing happily in the playground, probably on the first evening, dressed in the same clothes she was wearing on the plane journey to Portugal. On the morning of Sunday the 29th, the McCanns say they ate breakfast at the Millennium restaurant. If we accept the evidence I discussed earlier about the last photo, that seems to be convincing evidence that she was alive, happy, dressed in a pretty pink dress, and dipping her feet in the pool on a warm day at lunchtime that Sunday, the first full day of the holiday. But after this point, things become very vague. There is very little information, either in the Portuguese files or in Kate McCann's book, for example, which gives us much information about Madeleine or what was going on for the rest of the week. So I'm going to ask these three key questions. 1. Were there any independent, credible and verifiable sightings of Madeleine during this period? 2. Were the McCanns seen out and about as a happy family of 5? 3. Were the McCanns seen out and about as a family of only 4? The first point to note is that we have no confirmed photographs of the McCanns nor of any of their children after the Sunday that week. The last photo is probably from Sunday, and the tennis balls photo has so many queries about it that I do not think we can rely on that as any proof of Madeleine being alive after Sunday. Second, in over 8.5 years since Madeleine was reported missing, no one, Not another holiday maker, a member of staff, a local, anyone to my knowledge has come forward to say that they had seen Madeleine and the McCanns, all 5 of them together on that holiday, or as a family of only 4 together. Further, as we'll see in more detail in a moment, none of the statements made appear to give a definite indication of someone clearly having identified Madeleine as alive after Sunday. Third, there was a strange change of plan by the McCanns regarding breakfasts and lunches. Despite breakfast being included in the price of their holiday, they decided from Monday onwards to eat breakfast in their own apartment. That is confirmed by all their Tapper 7 friends. Their stated reason was that it was too far to walk to the Millennium for breakfast. But was there a different reason? Fourth, we are told in various places that all the Tapper 7 group would take all their children each day to the apartment occupied by the Paynes for a kind of buffet or sandwich lunch on their balcony. Yet the McCanns decided for the rest of the week after Sunday not to join their friends and to have their lunch in their own apartment, which was on the floor below that of the Paynes. No reason is given for this. But suppose something had happened to Madeleine by the Monday of that week. To stay in the apartment for lunch with just one parent bringing the twins home for lunch from the creche would avoid anyone seeing the 4 of them together and asking the obvious but awkward question, where is Madeleine? If the McCanns were to take only the twins to the Paynes' apartment, people would inevitably ask the question, where's Madeleine? Fifth, we are told that on leaving their apartment during the week, one of the McCanns would leave via the back door of the apartment and the other parent by the front door. Why would they do this? Again, was it connected in some way with Madeleine being missing at this time? Is it possible that all of this apparent subterfuge was intended to disguise the fact that Madeleine was no longer with them? There was an echo of this in what we read earlier in Kate McCann's version of what happened on the evening of the 3rd of May, the night Madeleine is supposed to have disappeared. We dealt earlier with whether there was any reliable evidence that Madeleine was still alive on Thursday the 3rd of May, and saw that there didn't appear to be. So do we have any reported sightings of Madeleine by other people from the Sunday through to the Thursday? We have these, and I shall examine each one. Kat Baker, Madeleine's nanny. A tapas restaurant cook who claimed to have seen Madeleine. A claimed sighting of Madeleine at a tennis lesson by journalist and former Crime Watch reporter Bridget O'Donnell. And a family who claimed their children were playing with the McCanns and their children on the Wednesday afternoon. So, first of all, what does Kat Baker say about Madeleine that week? She is asked by the police and says, most of the time in which I saw the family together, the children would be eating. The twins appeared tired at lunch after a long day, and also perhaps due to the heat, but I never took much notice of the McCanns' behaviour that week. That is the clearest possible contradiction with the McCanns' equally clear statements that they were taking breakfast and lunch in their own rooms and not going to any of the Ocean Club eating places at lunchtime. If the McCanns were telling the truth about having their meals in their room, it means Kat Baker wasn't with them when they were having breakfast and lunch. The McCanns were eating in their own apartment. So has Kat Baker made this up in order to try to convince the police that Madeleine was alive that week? But in any event, we saw earlier how Kat Baker seemed to have been on very friendly terms with the McCanns, and is therefore not an independent witness. Second, let's look at the statement by the tapas restaurant cook, Maria Manuela Antonia Jose. She made a statement to the police on the 6th of May. Here is an extract from her statement. When she was informed about the disappearance, she did not realize which child this was. It was only later, upon watching the television news that night, and after seeing pictures of the missing child on television, that she realized who the girl was. And that's because, as we've seen, the photo she saw on television that weekend would have been the so-called first photo, as we saw earlier. This was of a much younger Madeleine. David Payne's daughter Lily looked similar to Madeleine. Here is a photo of Lily on holiday in Praia de Luz. On the left, side by side with a photo of Madeleine, just before she went on holiday. Perhaps for the tapas cook, this was a simple case of mistaken identity. Hers is a vague statement giving no reliable or checkable details about any specific occasions. She worked in the restaurant and probably saw lots of children coming and going. It looks then as if this witness could be mistaken. She made claims about having seen Madeleine taking meals that week when in fact the McCanns were having lunch with the twins in their apartment every day. Third, Bridget O'Donnell, who was a journalist and writer. She used to work on BBC Crime Watch. She is the partner of filmmaker Jeremy or Jez Wilkins, who did much of the filming for the ITV documentary series My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding. She was asked to write a long article in the mainstream media in December 2007 because she was actually in Praia da Luz the same week as the McCanns. She titled her article, My 6 Months with Madeleine. This was a reference to her having been with the McCanns that week in Praia da Luz, and therefore she claims having lived with Madeleine for the 6 months since she went missing. But despite that extravagant title, and despite she and Jez having become friends with the McCanns that week, there is not one sentence in the whole long article referring to or describing Madeleine, nor does she describe any specific incident. The only thing that comes anywhere near it is this reference to Madeleine playing tennis on Thursday morning. Earlier that day there had been tennis lessons for the children, with some of the parents watching proudly as their girls ran across the court chasing tennis balls. They took photos. Madeleine must have been there, but I couldn't distinguish her from the others. They all looked the same, all blonde, all pink and pretty. The statement, Madeleine must have been there, is hardly convincing, especially with no other reference to her by Miss O'Donnell. So we cannot count that as credible evidence of having seen Madeleine any time that week either. So forth I come to the Boyd family, who claimed that their little boy played with Madeleine for most of the Wednesday afternoon, the day before Madeleine was reported missing. Their story surfaced in a small circulation family periodical, First magazine. Here is a photo of the actual article, which appeared just 2 weeks after Madeleine was reported missing. The Boyd family was certainly in Praia da Luz that week. Indeed, it appears that they feature in the playground picture, which we noted was almost certainly taken on the first day of the holiday. Mr. Jason Boyd, then aged 39, is the man in the red shirt left of picture, with his wife Vicky, aged 34. Their son Louis was 3, and they also had a 10-month-old baby with them. A year later, the family featured in Rupert Murdoch's Sun. Here's a photo of the family on the beach, reading The Sun. So in this lengthy article, we have what appears to be crystal clear, watertight evidence of Madeleine being alive and playing happily on the day before she disappeared. It sounds like it was most of the afternoon. Madeleine playing around the pool, then playing football for an hour, then returning to be with Mummy and Daddy by the pool. But there are two very big problems with this story, and several others besides. First, the creche records for that afternoon that we looked at earlier. What do they tell us? Let's have a look. They clearly tell us that Madeleine was shown as being in the Lobster Group creche with her nanny Kat Baker all afternoon from 2:45 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. So there's a conflict of evidence. Was she playing football with Louis or in the creche all afternoon with Kat Baker? It can't have been both. But there's another possible way of checking what happened that afternoon, and that's to look at what Kate McCann says about that afternoon in her book Madeleine. We find it on page 60, Wednesday the 2nd of May 2007. Our last... So, no mention of any sun, only a mention of rain. And certainly no mention of Madeleine happily playing football with little Louis for an hour, or whooshing down the water slide. So what can we make of this? Was it fabricated by the Boyds? Were they roped in by the McCann team to concoct this story? Did the publishers of First magazine check their story out with the McCanns? Whichever it was, no way can we take this as any proof that Madeleine was alive on Wednesday the 2nd of May. Within the past few months, a British expat living and working in Canada, Lizzie Taylor, known on the internet as Heidi-Ho, has compiled a very useful analysis of all the other claimed sightings of Madeleine that week. Here are some extracts from her article, based on extensive analysis of all the relevant witness statements. Like everyone else, I once believed that Madeleine was seen during the holidays, as there were so many people that claimed to have seen her. As I started to collate the witness statements and scrutinise each one, I realised that apart from Fatima da Silva, who saw Madeleine and the family outside the apartment one day, there was not one statement that had a similar degree of credibility. I thought that the possibility of something happening to Madeleine prior to Thursday would be impossible, but after reading all the statements, every one, except Fatima, allows for doubt. Some were very obviously mistaken. She then goes on to list other witness statements from people I have not mentioned so far. Here is Lizzie Taylor's list and her comments. Cecilia Diaz Firmino, receptionist at Millennium, described a shy Madeleine and saw them on days they were not at restaurant. Therefore, not proof that she saw Madeleine. She may have seen one of the other tapas children. Geronimo Salcedes, tapas barman, admits to not being able to recognise if it was Madeleine. Luisa Ana de Nona de Azevedo Coutinho, receptionist, claims to have seen Madeleine with the McCann's friend Dr. Russell O'Brien, but his daughter was not in the creche that morning and looks very similar to Madeleine, so likely mistaken. Georgina Jackson, tennis instructor, was non-specific about seeing Madeleine, only that she was part of the group for that morning. Charlotte Pennington, creche nanny. We've already covered Charlotte Pennington earlier in the film. Diaz Romao claimed seeing Madeleine at times she was not there, according to the creche record. Emma Wilding did not know Madeleine well and makes incorrect statement about seeing Jerry. Paula Cristina de Costa Vieira, cleaner, says she saw Madeleine McCann twice leaving the Millennium at about 9:30 to 10 a.m, but they didn't go to the Millennium for breakfast. Non-specific comments that do not confirm Madeleine's presence were made by Jez Wilkins, Stephen Carpenter and Daniel Stuck. So what about that one statement that Lizzie Taylor thinks may be credible, one by Fatima Maria Serafim da Silva Espada, the daughter of one of the cleaners? She says that she saw the McCanns and their 3 children. Let's look at the relevant extract from her statement, and let's note that this particular alleged sighting took place on the Sunday, and see what a tremendous amount of specific detail she gives to the police as she unfolds what she saw. She states that this took place on Sunday the 29th of April, just before she finished her morning shift at 13:30, as she had the afternoon off that day. At about 13:15 she went to help her mother, who was cleaning apartment 5I of the same block, situated on the first floor. She clearly remembers seeing the girl, accompanied by her siblings and mother, leave their apartment 5A and walk to the stairs leading to the floor above. She was very close to them, at a distance of about 1 metre, observing their movements for a few moments, because she was charmed by them. Madeleine led the way with a plate, perhaps plastic, in her hand, bearing a piece of bread. As regards the clothes she was wearing, she only remembers a skirt, but cannot recall its description. She noted, because she thought them nice, the type of shoes she was wearing, tennis shoes, light in colour she thinks, which had little lights along the soles, which lit up each time she stepped on the ground. Her siblings followed behind her, wearing the same kind of shoes, and each holding a piece of bread in their hands. Their mother followed behind them without holding their hands. She seemed to remember the mother was also carrying a plate. Moments afterwards, perhaps the time it took to close the apartment door, the father came out and also headed to the apartment upstairs. When asked, she does not remember whether the father pulled the door closed or locked it with a key. So here we have a statement which I suggest clearly is credible. It is not vague, it does not look contrived. Moreover, she sees all 5 members of the family together, and after that I would contend that no one ever sees all 3 children together that week. What about her shoes? Unfortunately, we do not see these in the last photo, so we don't know if they are the same ones as this cleaner describes. However, we do have the photos taken what I think was the day before, and on this one, the playground picture, we can see that Madeleine is indeed wearing exactly the same shoes as described by the cleaner. In the last photo, Madeleine is wearing a pink dress. The cleaner remembers Madeleine wearing a skirt, she thinks, but can't remember what colour it was. It's easy to confuse a dress with a skirt. This incident happens at about 1:15 p.m. on the Sunday. Is it possible that Madeleine was already in the clothes in which she is seen in the last photo? I think it is. So, in the statement of Louisa Anna Coutinho, we have a detailed, wholly credible statement that is also fully consistent with the last photo having been taken about an hour later by the pool, after lunch on the Sunday. The clarity and detail of this witness statement shows up the other statements from the Ocean Club staff for what they are: vague statements with no detail and therefore lacking credibility.
Okay, so we'll now proceed with the theory that Madeleine died in the McCann's apartment on 29th of April 2007. We will also proceed with the theory that all of the facts about this needed to be covered up. The people connected to her death needed to be protected by the British establishment. So we mentioned Robert Murat a few times. Let's have a look at him. Robert Murat is a British-Portuguese citizen who, it was determined, flew to Portugal on the 1st of May. As a person fluent in both Portuguese and English, he ended up volunteering to help with translation in relation to the McCann case. It appears that the British consul, Bill Henderson, who retired in 2007, may have actually suggested Murat as a translator. Murat was well known locally, and so this makes his original claim of not knowing of Madeleine's disappearance on the 3rd of May difficult to accept, and then there was a commotion going on at the time. In his film, Richard Hall gives detailed account of Murat's involvements in the days he was in Portugal, where he went, where he travelled. Murat was re-questioned by police on the 14th of May 2007. Portuguese police analysed his mobile phone records, and he was then questioned again after that analysis, and he gave a different story as to where he'd been. And you can see, for example, this is quite a revealing picture that Richard included in his documentary. McCann's apartment's there, and the Murat property is there. It's pretty close, isn't it? And Amaral was also very suspicious of Murat when he'd been involved for a few days. His behaviour starts to seriously intrigue us. This is what he writes in the book. He often makes reference to similar cases that happened in the United Kingdom and which he seems to know in detail. He displays suspicious curiosity and seeks to know more. He offers to help us identify possible suspects. He knows the workings of the Ocean Club and the habits of the holidaymakers very well. He even allegedly tried secretly to access the investigation files. It is also known that he visits websites of a pornographic nature. His mother has set up a desk near the tapas restaurant in order to gather and give out information about Madeleine. We don't know if this woman's actions are philanthropic in nature or if she is hoping to keep well informed of all the information circulating about the case. And on May the 14th, as I've already said, Murat himself was named as a suspect in the case. This was because the account of his activities he gave to the police was shown to be false, so he was shown to be lying. He had given a false account of movements on the 1st to the 4th of May, including several meetings with unnamed people. When interviewed by the Portuguese police, he did not have a lawyer present and lied, so it seems he must have been confident that he would be protected. He may even have been a willing patsy for the abduction, as we'll come on to very shortly. Murat admitted he had gone to the Palmares Golf Club on Thursday PM, and then he had several meetings he didn't originally admit to. The mobile phone records, when studied, suggest that before Madeleine McCann was reported missing, Robert Murat and Jerry McCann may have spent time together at the Palmares Golf Club near Praia de Luz. Murat seemed to go well outside his brief of a translator, and so Inspector Veranda filed a complaint to Amaral about Murat. He said that Murat kept on asking about the strategy of the investigation, kept on asking about what work was going to be done, kept on trying to steal a look at confidential documents, had detailed knowledge of the Ocean Club, had detailed knowledge of McCann's and friends and movements, actively tried to influence the conduct of the investigation, suggested that foreigners were responsible for the abduction. Is it any wonder that the police tapped Murat's phone? Was he already known to the McCanns? Of course, Jerry McCann refused to answer that question. If Murat was indeed connected to UK intelligence, he was then in an ideal position to find out many details being investigated and discovered by the Portuguese police. A witness statement from Carlos Costa, who knew Murat for 15 years, was taken by Portuguese police. Costa describes Murat as a violent and sexually deviant character, and he describes specific instances of this, and this is in Richard's films. Murat booked his flight out to Portugal only about 6 hours before he actually flew. It's very short notice. How often do you book a flight to somewhere unless somebody's, died, basically? Murat flew out to Portugal early on the 1st of May. Now, Martin Brunt, he's a Sky News reporter. I think he still is, as far as I know. He has a reputation for gaining insider information. Hugo Rifkin reported in the Times diary of 22nd December 2006, high praise for the Sky News crime correspondent Martin Brunt. When a hack from another newspaper phoned Suffolk Police press office with a query about the serial killer case, he was told, "Call Martin Brunt. He knows everything before we do." A little concerning. Brunt was the first to report the arrest of Amy Winehouse and the resignation of Sir Ian Blair as Metropolitan Police Commissioner, and he was the first to interview Robert Murat, then suspected of involvement in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. His contacts also led to Sky News being the first to report the 7th of July events in London, where the work of terrorists, was the work of terrorists, and allowed Sky News to break the news of the death of Queen Mother. In 2010, Brunt reported live from Rothbury during the police hunt for the gunman Raoul Moat. He also doorstepped McCann researcher Brenda Leyland, and who was later found dead. So, in my opinion, what you're going to hear now is what Richard D. Hall has done from the transcript of the PJ files. He's simulated a conversation that took place that the Portuguese police picked up from Robert Murat.
Many news organisations from many countries covered the Madeleine McCann case. Sky News gave the case intensive coverage. Their man in Pride of Us was their chief crime correspondent, Martin Brunt. I'm going to take a brief look now at the 2 phone calls Brunt made to Robert Murat. The first, secretly recorded by the Portuguese police and published by them in August 2008, took place on the 15th of May, the day after Murat had been made a suspect. His mother, Jennifer Murat, picked up the call. It went like this.
Hello, residents of Jenny Murat. Hello, Martin Brunt speaking. Hi, dear. Hi, is everything all right? Yes, Robert is a little depressed now. I'm sure he is. It wasn't very nice of Sky News to refer to him as our Guido, don't you think? I didn't see that. I was up at our house. What are they saying in regard to that? Robert Murat has been made an arguido in the case of Madeleine McCann. What does the term arguido mean in Portuguese? What does the term arguido mean, Robert? Suspect. Suspect. Okay, well, I'm not completely familiar with the legal Portuguese terms. I think that someone said that the police said they were treating Robert as an arguido. Robert, as an arguido? What I mean is, what is that? I'm going to pass you to Robert. Don't hang up, Martin. Okay, thanks. Hello, Martin. Hello, Robert. Your number didn't show up. That's why I didn't know who it was. Oh, I didn't send you my number. That's okay. Well, I will see if I manage not to lose this one, if I can find the tool. Okay, we will try. I have not seen it yet, but we will try to explain. The police say, or was it the local journalists who say, you should be treated as an arguido, that he is a suspect, basically. Yes, well, even so, given the tone of the interrogation, and the fact of being free, which says a lot about the interest in you, eh? That is the same as finishing me off. It was not me. I didn't do anything. And now I am literally... Okay, I know, I think. It's always on when I turn the TV on. And even now. Yes, well, it would be better to turn it off. Really. To have been quiet was the best thing I could have done. Yes. But when I turn the television on, I think, they are going to finish me completely. They are finishing me off. Okay, I'm going to tell you that in order to have an idea. I'll tell you what we're going to do. Did you talk to the lawyer? 2 things. We talked to the Sky lawyer. Right. Who was of the opinion that according to what you signed, you reported your work as being that of a translator. Certainly, as far as... The thing is that it was... It probably is. Oh, go on, continue. We talked to a Sky lawyer, but the problem with the Sky lawyer is that he is English. Yes, no. He is our lawyer. And you can see he said what it seemed to be to him. According to his understanding. According to his understanding, exactly. And now we are reluctant to talk to the lawyer who contacted you. That's right, okay. We do not know him, okay. And you do not know him. Well, you don't? Exactly, that's right. I do not know him, mate. And we do not know where he came from or what his credibility is. Yes, and they told us that the police were going to play games with false leads, and that was why, and who knows whether he is who he says he is. That's right, okay. And he could be trying to test you out, or hoping that we pass him some information. Certainly. We know that you suspect your calls are being listened to because of this. Right. Because of this reason we are very reluctant, because we do not know him, and you do not know him. But however, the best option you have to come clean with this would probably be to go with a lawyer from Lisbon. Someone from up there, not from the Algarve. It would have to be someone from Lisbon. Is that okay? That's okay. I will try and arrange for someone from there. But our position in relation to all this, for the moment, as I have explained previously, is that we consider ourselves to be very important, and I think it was your opinion initially to do something finally that would manage to be on your side. Yes, and that would not lead to my being detained immediately. Of course, and many of the things that you told me were not attributed to me. I understand, and I don't want to enter into all those details, and we did not do anything since I left you. No. I'm sure you understand. Yes. And if there is anything that better clarifies that you think you could say, that could also be used in the future, of course. You could quote Sky sources and others. Yes, that would be perfect. That would be just perfect. But I think it is important that you should have the media there, and if we could appear briefly and make statements in these terms. I was questioned. It was a vague questioning. I was not asked direct questions about Madeleine, and afterwards you explained to me how you felt that they made you a scapegoat, that you have nothing to hide even if your computer is analysed, and at the end of the day you will be absolved, and they will find the true abductor or kidnapper. You could. Let's first look at this with a Portuguese lawyer. We will, won't we? Yes, no. Are you going to do this? I will do my best to arrange for one now. Yes. But independently of what the lawyer thinks, I think that this is the clearest option. But we will have to try to find someone who... Yes, I think this is the simplest. Can you confirm this? I am here having a family discussion to see what they think. Ah, yes, of course I will. But I'm talking about making very clear statements. Yes, okay. That they do not enter into many details, but into the way you can get your message across. Get it across, okay. That you give your version of events, given that the only version of events is vague, and yes, and that the two local journalists and everyone are against you, and that there is nobody, with the exception of my interview with Sally, yes, there has nobody who has spoken in favour of Robert Murat because of this. In fact, of the many interviews given, I have heard that there were some positive ones, people contradicting each other. Yes, they arrived and said, no, they have been very positive about this. Of course, people from the area, people from here, exactly. Who know what happened? Many people from the area said very positive things about this, about me, which is useful. Of course. Well, I will see what I can find and get back in touch with you. Okay, bye. And if we agree on this, yes, and if we could agree to appear for 15 minutes? I never have any problem with making a statement. Okay. I have no problem with that, whilst I have the legal cover to do so, because I don't want to end up in prison. That would be the last thing we want. Firstly, for something I did not do, and secondly, for something that would break their contract rules. I understand that, and I understand the sensitive nature of everything that we have been working with since we arrived here. So, okay, can I phone you again in half an hour? Goodbye. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Just a summary of the conversation. Murat calls Brunt mate. Brunt has a house in Praia de Luz. That comes out. They referred to a contract that Murat was involved in, that he'd signed some kind of contract. Did he help plan the abduction story? He says, I don't want to end up in prison, firstly for something I did not do, and secondly for something that would break their contract rules. That's what he actually says in that conversation. I understand the sensitive nature of everything we have been working with since we arrived. So what are they actually discussing here? Why is Martin Brunt even contacting Murat? He's not ringing him up to... He doesn't say, you know, oh, I understand you're Robert Murat and you've been named as a possible subject. Could I interview you over the phone to be published on Sky News tomorrow? He's not saying any of that. They're known to each other. And there's arrangements of being made and are being made. That's what comes out in that phone call that was tapped. So a possible theory in Richard's film, and I think he's got a pretty good theory here. He was in England when Madeleine died. That's not a theory, that's true. He was quickly recalled to Portugal immediately after Madeleine died. He acted in 2007 as an agent of British intelligence. His role when he got involved there was the following. Finding a property in Lagos where Madeleine's body could be hidden on behalf of British intelligence, offering to act as an interpreter for the Portuguese police and thus infiltrate their investigation on behalf of British intelligence, and being used as a fake perpetrator for Madeleine's faked abduction on behalf of British intelligence. So he was like a key sort of linchpin of the case. He was very important to them. Okay, we're going to come on to the reason why the cover-up shortly. But before we do that, I've shown you the evidence, and some of it, and there's a lot more in Richard's film, that Madeleine died and her death was covered up. So, without knowing any of that, Richard was contacted, or he contacted a guy in the States called Peter Hyatt. And he does what's called statement analysis. Hyatt is a tutor and trainer in techniques of statement analysis, which can be applied to investigation of crimes by detectives to make their questioning more effective and detect deception more easily. His technique looks mainly at linguistics and the diction, choice of words. He blogged about the McCann case in November 2012, which you can read on his blog. Peter Hyatt analysed an interview with the McCanns, which they'd given to Australian TV back in 2011. And Peter Hyatt didn't know Richard D. Hall, he hadn't looked at the films, he hadn't investigated the McCann case. He just listened to that 10-minute interview, I think it was, 10 or 11 minutes, and done a statement analysis of what they said in that interview and that interview alone. He highlights the use of past tense in descriptions of a missing child. Normally, a mother cannot accept that a child has disappeared and would normally be far less inclined to use the past tense. And Kate does this a lot, she uses the past tense. He highlights that McCanns in their language show far more concern for themselves than for Madeleine. They exhibit a need to persuade their audience of what happened. He highlights the use of distancing and impersonal language. Hyatt argues that the interview contained an embedded confession of what actually happened to Madeleine. Hyatt also wrote a blog about the more recent McCann-Fiona Bruce 10-year anniversary interview, which aired in April this year, which you can read there as well if you wish. So what Peter Hyatt concluded from the Australia 2011 interview was that Madeleine is dead. The death was not intentional. The McCanns have disposed of the remains in a manner which they feel confident will not be found. The cause of death may have included causing her to be very sleepy and fall. They feared being accused. The time frame of what McCanns gave, with the abduction and everything, must be questioned, and there is a strong possibility of sexual abuse being involved somewhere in the picture. And Pat Brown, this was given to me by John, who's in the audience, who's a criminal profiler, she had made similar comments, and I think I've got a clip of her here.
Hello there, and good evening, and welcome to the Jim Bohannon Show from Westwood One Radio. Profiler Pat Brown is making a return visit to talk about her latest book. The difference tonight is that you may have trouble buying it. It's an e-book called Profile of the Disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Till recently, you could buy it from Amazon.com, but no more. We understand the book is available from Barnes & Noble online at their initials, bn.com, for their Nook, e-Nook reader. Pat Brown, two stories here, I guess. Number one, the story of Madeleine McCann, and number two, the story of you and Amazon. For those, let's just start at the beginning. Okay. What is the profile of the disappearance of Madeleine McCann all about? Let's assume that people have forgotten exactly who Madeleine McCann is.
Right. Madeleine McCann was a little 3-year-old girl who was on vacation with her parents, Jerry and Kate McCann, and their friends, 7 of them, and there were also the brother and sister who were 2 years old. And the McCanns and the friends had a habit of leaving the children unattended in their vacation apartments while they went over to the bar restaurant for a few hours every evening. And the last evening, Madeleine disappeared, and she has not been seen since. It's been 4 years now, and no one knows what happened to Madeleine.
Now, then you put together an e-book profile of the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Before we get into all that you have put forward to posit about the disappearance, what happened with Amazon?
Well, what happened was there's a kind of a controversy going on concerning the McCanns over the 4 years. The controversy is, did the McCanns have anything to do with the disappearance of their daughter, or was the child abducted by some predator or child sex ring or somebody who wanted a little child? There's two camps over this, and there were a lot of suspicious circumstances. An abduction was never proved to have happened. So the McCanns became suspects in Portugal, what is called aguidos, and then they left Portugal, and since then they've been looking for their daughter, and they established a fund to search for their daughter, and this was all going quite well. But when people started speaking up and saying, some of us actually think the parents might be involved, they were shut down because the McCanns hired Carter Ruck, which is like the biggest libel solicitors in I don't think maybe the whole world, but certainly in Britain, and they would sort of sick this law firm on anybody who said, hey, I question whether they could be involved. They sued the detective on the case when he put his book out and got an injunction to get it off the market. And so people have stopped speaking out whether about their opinions because they're afraid of Carter Ruck. They're going to get sued. And so the media no longer says anything negative about the McCanns. They question nothing anymore. And so Kate just put out her book called Madeleine, and after I read her book, I decided I would do what people wanted me to and put out a profile of the disappearance of Madeleine McCann and put out a theory of what I think happened based on the evidence that exists. Mm-hmm. And I did so, and about 5 weeks after I put it up on Amazon, it vanished. And it vanished off of Amazon.com, Amazon.co.uk, that's the British one, and out of Germany as well. So vanished everywhere. And people said, what happened to your profile, your book? And so I wrote Amazon. I said, what happened? Where'd it go? And they said, well, they took it off for legal conflicts. And I said, well, what legal conflicts are you talking about? And they said, well, we need you to change the title and all the content.
Otherwise, it's just what we were looking for.
Exactly. And so I'm like, okay, would you want to explain this a little further? And then they sent me the letter that said they had received a letter from Carter Ruck, the solicitors of Jerry and Kate McCann, who said that I had libeled their clients, and therefore, until we worked it out, the McCanns and I, and agreed that the book was not libelous, they were no longer going to sell it. So that's when it disappeared off at the market.
Wow.
Yeah, it was rather interesting.
I was trying to think of another instance of something similar to this, and I'm at a loss. I don't really know of anything quite like this.
Yeah, well, I think this is kind of a new problem with the self-publishing world. Now, I have 2 other books on the market published the last one came through Hyperion Voice, and when I wrote that one, which is called The Profile of My Life Hunting Serial Killers and Psychopaths, came out in 2010, I did a lot of cases in that book, and before they published it, their lawyers went through it with a fine-tooth comb. They made me turn over all my files so that they made sure that the book was acceptable and we weren't going to be sued over it. So when Amazon sold that, they already had Hyperion Voice saying it's an okay book because our lawyers have been to it. Besides, you're not going to get sued, we will. But with self-publishing, where's the gatekeeper? So Amazon's like, well, nobody looked over this book. There's no publisher except you. So quite frankly, we're running a business and we don't want to take a chance with Carter Ruck. So it's kind of funny. People say when Carter Ruck comes after you, you've been Carter Rucked.
Interesting. So in this day and age, what you're essentially saying is that as we enter this whole brave new world of the non-gatekeepers, that if you've got enough money and enough lawyers and a willingness to throw your weight around, that you can essentially shut down your critics.
Exactly, and that's what has been happening with McCanns. They have effectively shut down anybody with an opinion that they do not like, and they don't like mine.
I must tell you that I got an email
Yes, you did, I'm sure.
Yes, I did, with a .uk address attached to it. Please be aware that the ebook Ms. Brown is promoting is full of misinformation, contradictions, and an imagined scenario. Ms. Brown has a well-known dislike of the McCanns, particularly Kate McCann, and for the past 4 years has made regular, inappropriate, and acidic comments about them on social networking sites.
Well, that's actually accurate. Sometimes you can't disagree with people who hate you. But yes, I have blogged for 4 years. I have a blog called The Daily Profiler. It's not very daily anymore because I'm too busy, but it's every monthly profiler, I think, now, but I haven't changed the name. But I often talk about cases like I do when I do television. I do commentary, and I analyze different cases, and I try to stick with look at the evidence, and here's what I'm thinking, and I try to put it, I always say it's a theory, this is not fact, this is a theory, which is what all profiling is, and it doesn't say anybody's guilty of anything. Yes, I have been fairly critical, because from the very beginning, there was something rather peculiar about the story, and of course it starts with leaving 3 little children alone in an apartment unattended, which is called child neglect. So it's kind of hard to be nice about that, in my opinion.
Well, it is hard, I suppose, to do that. Among other things in this email, they claim that your book is done in an effort to convince people that Madeleine is dead.
Well, I would...
What are the odds? What are the odds?
Well, this is kind of funny because, well, in a very sad way, one of the reasons Kate McCann supposedly sues people is because she says no one has the right to say Madeleine is dead because that keeps people from looking for her. Which sounds like, if you're a mother, you can sort of see where she's coming from. But the fact is, the chances of Madeleine being alive, even if she didn't die of an accident in the apartment, which is what the police believe, and what I think the evidence lends to, she would likely be dead, because if she was abducted by somebody, it would be like a sex predator, a child sex predator, and they usually kill a child within an hour. And the concept that a child is going to be targeted to go into a sex ring and be taken around the world is not very likely. And on top of it, the McCanns put together a campaign which featured the eye defect that Madeleine has, which is called a coloboma, which is, kind of defect in the eye, which you have a dark line coming out of the pupil. They put that as part of the publicity. Well, if I were a child kidnapper and I had this kid with this very obvious defect, I'd get rid of the child very quickly because she could be identified. So if she wasn't dead, you're going to kind of make her dead by doing that. So